All right. So it's great to have you, Lee. And we've waiting for this meeting and this interview quite a while. And I'm very glad that you finally made it. And part of the goal why we are here is to make an international connection between student groups and get to know each other a little bit further, and most important of all, see how we can collaborate in the future. So very nice to have you on.
Thank you
Wonderful.
so much. I'm so excited to be here. It's
Really
awesome.
happy to
Yeah,
be here. Yeah, we've been looking forward to this too for quite some time. So happy to be doing this.
Mike.
So for our German viewers, could you introduce yourselves a little?
Yeah, absolutely. So my name's Lee Vossen. I'm the president and founder of our Canadian nonprofit organization, Students Against Mandates. And then I'll let Sheldon, you can introduce yourself.
Yeah, my name's Sheldon Monroe. I'm a University of Calgary student in Alberta, Canada, and I am the head of legal is my title I hold right now with Students Against Mandates.
So just for completion, I'm Paul Romay, and I'm doing like PR for Stauf, and it's the German name for students getting up. And yeah, it's a movement which basically has formed in the Corona times. And yeah, we're still going strong, since I think there's many topics to cover. And I wanted to just elaborate that we're still in a crazy situation, Lee, because we couldn't have our last meeting. And do you want to say something along the lines that we are still seeing restrictions in our daily lives which have like a real world impact?
Oh, yeah. Well, the reason why our last meeting didn't happen, so we were supposed to do this interview last weekend, but I was traveling, and the issue is I'm still not allowed to leave Canada by flying from, Canada into the States. I have to drive across the border, which ended up causing a lot of problems for me with like delayed flights and things like that in Grand Forks, which is in the US. But that's like, there's lots of different things still happening here in Canada that unvaccinated people have to deal with, which is ridiculous. There's still mask mandates at universities, and there's still, for some people, there's vaccine mandates depending on the healthcare program you want to get into. Or if you're a resident student, there's one, I think University of Toronto, they need a booster shot to be a resident student. So there's still stuff happening in Canada that's ridiculous. If that's what you were meaning.
Yes.
Yeah.
So everything started out in 2020, as we all know. And so we're sitting here. I think it's quite safe to say that none of us got along with the government policies. And I was very curious about what your initial reaction was and what you did with your resentment. I don't know how to call it, but like this energy which somehow got liberated and you started something.
Mhm.
I think that's a really good way to phrase it. Resentment.
That's a really good way to phrase it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I had building resentment. I can start, and then Sheldon, you can
Sure.
share
Sounds
yours.
good.
But so for myself, I was noticing even before the pandemic, a lot of sort of dangerous ideology. I'm going to call it woke ideology that I really didn't like. And that includes like cancel culture, gender ideology, all these different things that I was starting to feel concerned about. I definitely didn't realize it was going to be as big of an issue as it turned into, but I was nervous about it, and I was starting to speak about it before the pandemic, just making little posts saying like, hey guys, cancel culture isn't really cool, let's have conversations, and like we should be able to have conversations with people who have different ideas than us, and let's not hate each other. I got a lot of backlash for that stuff and got canceled before the pandemic, but then the pandemic hits, and then I really start to see why these ideologies are so dangerous. And I was like, I don't agree with getting an experimental vaccine for myself, and I almost don't feel comfortable saying that because people are going to lose their minds, right? So I didn't love that. And then I got an email in August of 2021 from the president of my college saying, if you're unvaccinated, you cannot come on campus, and that's students or staff. At the time, I was an online student, so it didn't affect me, that mandate. And I had expected that for the rest of the time I was in college, I'd be online. So I was like, oh, I could just say nothing, But the resentment had built up enough that I just thought, no, you need to speak up for people who are being affected. And I knew this was going to bar a lot of people from getting an education. So I wrote an email, and that sort of just, there was a huge weight that was lifted off my shoulders, because I just felt this like thing kind of, you know, like it was just bothering me a lot. And that was a bit of relief. And then it just snowballed from there. I kept doing things. I started an Instagram account, started posting about it. I branded it. I'm a graphic designer, so I used my skills there, and it just turned into this really, really cool community. So that's my bit.
Yeah, and for myself, I like how Lee started hers, because I had very similar experiences. It started a little bit before the COVID actually came in, and I think that there was a certain, yes, political, legal, socio-political climate which allowed for this kind of heavy-handed mandates in Canada to be ushered in seamlessly without a lot of resistance, at least in the political level. And so, yeah, exactly. I was doing my undergrad, and I just began university just quickly back in 2018. Yes, 2019. And I had noticed that there was, again, a lack of the ability to have dialogue with one another. Issues would seem to be really predicated on emotion rather than, empirical evidence per se. And so then COVID, eventually we get to 2020. This was very noticeable in these first year or so I was in college, prior to COVID, this kind of climate. It was odd. I mean, it was almost undefined. You weren't really sure what was going on, but you were in lectures and people were angry with another, and it seemed to be very reasonable issues we could come together and have a discussion about. And I still believe that most people are very good people and just want what's best for everybody, but have different ways of approaching these to solve an issue. But COVID comes along, and I mean, right from the get-go, the models coming out of China were actually quite encouraging. I think this is a thing a lot of people forget, is that it had really, this virus was going to target, unfortunately, elderly people and people with high levels of comorbidity rates. So that's actually positive. And my father, he's a statistician, my mother an economist, sister an economist, and so I was quickly able to get that kind of cost benefit analysis from family members. My father going, well, the numbers don't really suggest that this is going to be as bad as it looks, and my mother and sister able to give some insight as to the harm this will cause the world economy if we begin heavy-handed lockdowns, right? So being able to balance that, it showed that you weren't able to, or at least was not going to be beneficial to be driven by fear in this scenario. There was the room for logic, and actually logic needed to prevail, and we needed to be based on empirical evidence before making our decisions. And so, immediately it was, Canada was, as I'm sure Germany was like, but Canada was incredible. The amount of fear every day that was perpetrated through our news, through our politicians, and really everyone in society became sort of, should you say, pharmaceutical reps for a drug that was coming. That was kind of how it was behaved. It was like you were talking not to a neighbor, but to a pharmaceutical rep. So there wasn't a lot of clear thinking going on. Fear was the main thing going on. And so, yes, again, school was very heavy-handed. Our schools shut down quite quickly, went online. Again, I wouldn't say a conducive learning environment by any means. And I ended up transferring to the University of Calgary. I was in Victoria, BC, originally, where I'm from, and ended up going into a degree in law and society. So very pertinent to the times. Eventually you were left, if you were not going to be following or touting the pervasive narrative, it was going to be an unpleasant time. That was made quite clear quickly on. So your teachers would go out of their way to make, very political statements in a class that really didn't require any political statements to even be made. I may be taking a quantitative analysis course, and here we're using the scenarios for basic regressions and statistical analyses to make very political statements, right? To use these situations to try to encourage people to tout the narrative. So very strange environment to be in. But eventually, yes, I'm go to Calgary Law and Society, and I ended up. This university says eventually, if you're not able to come onto campus, you're going to be kicked off if you don't take this injection. Now, of course, for young people, there's a lot of hesitancy, and of course,
All right, let me just step in there.
Yes, please.
So I see that you were very critical also of the way this discussions were being held, and that yeah, we saw a similar thing in Germany going on with the moralization of the general conversation that, or the debate that was being held in society. And my issue was like, how did you guys get together? How you're now the head of law in S.A.M. So where did you first meet? Where did you know that something was going on? Some critical thoughts around around academia. How
Yes.
did it go all along?
Yeah, great question. I'll lead it to that. And but so yes, so exactly, we have this issue going on in our schools. We're not able to attend classes if we're not vaccinated, and of course we have the trucker convoy occurs too. We have this kind of uprising of people upset, and I eventually had typed an email to a number of my university dean, or pardon me, it was the head of the university. I believe they still hold the title of dean, if I'm not mistaken. But and I CC'd many of my professors from my previous university, and just it was a critical email stating I'm not enjoying what's going on here. I think we need debate, and this isn't okay to force students to get this. And I had a professor, actually, didn't receive a letter back from my current dean at the University of Calgary, but I received a letter from one of my professors at University of Camosun in Victoria, and he said you ought to get in touch with this group, Students Against Mandates. You know, there are groups going on out there. You ought to put your minds together. Young students should put your minds together. And I had another friend who also said, yeah, there's a great group, Students Against Mandates. You ought to look into them. And so I reached out to Lee on kind of a whim. I wasn't too sure who I was reaching out to and what was going on, but became an amazing group, and it's been absolutely wonderful. So we've created a national organization of students now.
He's in Calgary, which is in Alberta. I'm in Manitoba, and then we have people in Ontario. Like, it's across Canada. He's flown into Winnipeg to visit us. I've gone out to BC when he's living in BC to visit him. So we've met in person and whatnot, but it's across Canada. It's not just like in one hub, which is kind of cool.
Yeah, so in order to prepare for the conversation, I wanted to get to you, Mike, just shortly, because we were also thinking like about the cultural dimension of the crises and what it says about the society and what it says about Canada. And I wanted to hand over to Mike.
Yeah, so I just wanted to say about the story you've been telling is a story that I've heard in Germany too. Like there's people who are suddenly getting isolated in the spheres that they are in, and then they are coming to Stauf, or students rising up, and they are finding themselves surrounded by like-minded people, right? By people who are actually trying to live a free life away from government. And that is something that I personally noticed, is that what a lot of these people have in common, it's very difficult to define, but I think that the distrust of government in general, and just being distrusting of authority, just saying, hey, wait a second, what's going on here? That is something that I would say is a defining characteristic of a lot of people who are in this movement. And so I wanted to ask you, personally, which kind of stories did you hear from people, how they've been treated during these mandates when they didn't wear a mask? Because I want to hear how it's like in Canada. We can tell you how it's in Germany.
It's been pretty bad. So I've received hundreds and hundreds of messages from people. I guess I should say too, at the beginning, I started the Instagram and I would get all these messages, and anyone who was in Winnipeg, I just started saying, let's meet for coffee. Let's meet in person. We're all being isolated. Let's kind of break that a bit. I'm pretty social, so I'm comfortable just meeting people I've never met before. And then I started bringing people over to my house. I was meeting through Instagram. So I said, potluck, everyone come over to my house. End up having 60 people at my house that I didn't know. I've never seen them in person. Like, get in here. And they're like, you're weird. And I was like, it's fine. Come in. So I started doing that, and I was hearing all these stories. And I had people who, let's say this girl was a paramedic. She was like, my family, I would come into the kitchen and I'd say, hey, everyone. And they would pretend I was not there. They would not acknowledge me until I got the vaccine. So she never got it, and she ended up moving out because she was like, what it was doing to my mental health was horrific. I had one of my old professors, she got the first dose, vaccine injured. And the school, she basically can't pick up a coffee cup. She can't walk properly. She has like all the symptoms of like very severe Parkinson's basically, and she's shaking all the time. She said, the school was essentially harassing me, telling me if I don't get vaccinated, double vaccinated, I need the second dose. If I don't, I'm kicked out. I lose my job. And she's like, I'm petrified. I'm a single like woman. I have a house. I need to be able to pay for my mortgage, all these things. I don't know what to do. I cannot get the second dose. There's just been so many. Like I've spent so much time like voice noting people or like meeting them in person. One individual was saying like she's a resident student and she's scared to not get it because she'll be sent back to China. And she's like, they'll know that I'm applying for my Canadian citizenship. And if I go back before I get my passport, I'll never be allowed to leave China again. They'll know that I was trying to leave. So she's like, I'm petrified of getting the vaccine because I know people who are injured. One of my friends is in the hospital in a bed right now, but I have to get it or I will have to live the rest of my life in China. And I was like, this stuff people are going through, like, it just gives me shivers. Like, and like families not letting other families come to Christmas, or like, I mean, I lost about 20 some friends. I had one girl hysterically crying when I told her I was unvaccinated, and she's like, you can't come into my house. You can't come near me. This is what the attitude was like every day. You go to a shopping center, and if you have your mask below your nose, you're getting glares. I had people come up to me and start screaming at my face and like going like this in my face. If my mask was below my chin and I was drinking out of a coffee cup. Like, it got very dark. It got pretty dark, and you felt kind of hopeless. And I think that's really what pushed me to start this group. I felt isolated and alone, and I was desperate to meet other like-minded people. I only had my family members who agreed with me. Nobody else in my life agreed with me. So I was doing what I could to bring these people together. And I knew the censorship was keeping us apart. So I was doing what I could to bring them together. And then I was saying, now that we're together, let's put our resources together. What do we do? Let's sue the school. Let's do protests. Let's print out flyers and go to protests and hand them out. Let's get people to join the group. Let's have events. So that's kind of the atmosphere for Canada, I would say.
Yeah, just a quick a quick addition to that, just so people understand it. Just if you were not, abiding by these rules in Canada, just to paint the, very clear picture. I know Lee did a wonderful job with it, but you were really enemy number one. Like you were not a friend of the society. So the very quick differentiation between those who were friends with society and those who were not, and it was extremely clear. I mean, geez, I don't know if it was like you had committed the most heinous crime in the world, but if you were unvaccinated or just skepticism was ruled to be a crime with incredible punishment. And it was really interesting in that sense, that because a lot of people genuinely were told from our television, our media, that they were killing somebody else's grandmother if they were not doing these procedures, right? These medical intervention methods. So just so people know, I mean, it is that level of hostility in our climate, which still, Lee could probably mention too, exists today. Like this isn't over, and I think we mentioned, and it's not really gone. People are still in it. But anyways, just as a slight addition there. So
I think that's really interesting, because this rationale, right? People are getting shamed, like in the cases you described, for you're not wearing a mask, you're trying to kill grandma, or by proxy you're killing grandma. And in Germany we had something similar, but it wasn't like, well, you don't wear a mask, you want to kill grandma. But we were talking about what's it called, the intensive care units. We were told in the beginning, ICUs, right, that we had so and so many ICU units available, and we had to flatten the curve. That's what you might have heard too, right? And so everyone who did not do his part to flatten the curve basically we were in a collectivist mindset already. We weren't so much focusing on grammar. We were saying, well, we have this resource in the society and we have to allocate it. And if you don't wear a mask, if you don't get vaccinated, that's what they were telling beforehand, then you are wasting resources.
Yes. It's an extremely bureaucratic position to take. It's funny when you become used to heavy levels of bureaucracy and procedural methods of kind of, I say this after a long time of thought, but really having your grips in on society, and as bureaucrats often do, is when they propose solutions, it's actually often the last people they're thinking of or speaking of is the people who really need the help. And often it's more about, the justification for their bureaucratic method. But anyways, just a little addition to that. It's interesting.
Yeah, so I just wanted to wrap up this whole topic of coronavirus with the fact, I don't know who was familiar with the situation, but actually in Canada, the PR agency Hill and Knowlton made the propaganda basically, and they had behavioral scientists working for them, and one of them is still working for basically the English government, and it's internationally coordinated, and they even figured out how you put which numbers you need, or if you take percentages, or if you take 1 of 100, 1 of 1,000, in order to maximize the fear and downplay the risks of the interventions. Yeah. So have you been able to grasp into the media landscape? Did you did some digging there?
Yeah, I can just mention on that really quickly before passing over to Lee. Yeah, it's the media landscape, it had to be examined quite quickly on. I mean, there was something clearly awry with the media. Of course, it was mentioned to Lee this morning. It's an interesting thing from the idea of from a legal perspective. When you make statements such as everyone needs to take this particular medical intervention treatment, the onus, the responsibility, the burden of proof falls upon your shoulders to prove that, you have to run a thorough cost-benefit analysis before forcing people to do such a thing. So therefore, the media, by stating, our Canadian media was stating, everyone needs to take this injection. Everyone needs to do this. Everybody, regardless of your background, your age, all these multiple factors, which as medical doctor Cordelia, a good one, that they play into the difference. If you're old, you may need a different treatment. If you're young, you may need a different treatment. So it's individualism. Doctors treat patients individually, not as a collective. But if you are stating that everyone needs to take something, you ought to know every single study in the pro and con column of what you're suggesting. So our government was just touting one line, and very quickly it was clear that they weren't actually considered. They had not run a thorough cost-benefit analysis. They didn't really know what they were saying. They were getting information from what seemed to be the pharmaceutical companies who were telling the government agents that they needed to tell the media to give this method. Of course, our media is heavily funded by our government, so the conflict of interests are quite evident early on. But yeah, the analysis of the media was fascinating. And of course, a lot of people who were stating such things as, there's, trying to combat misinformation is a term, a little phrase we like to use, which is, again, awfully vague. What is misinformation? Who's qualified to combat it? I mean, is there a degree in this? This is very strange. But they're often rewarded heavily in our society for these actions of combating misinformation. Often are not medical doctors. A few prominent ones, some of the most well-known, simply hold legal degrees. So they're speaking on medical issues, but they're not actually doctors themselves. So yes, I think you bring up a great point there, Paul, that the examination of the media became really, really critical for most people, as they were key perpetrators in this kind of issue. And so,
yeah. And so I know that you sent me links to that sort of behavioral science or like analysis propaganda campaign. Basically, I haven't watched all of it. I watched some of it, but so I can't really speak to that right now. But the stuff that I was seeing towards the beginning of the pandemic, which you guys, I don't know what was happening necessarily in Germany, what you guys were seeing on your screens, But I remember the first day that I found out about the pandemic, I come into work at my office. All of the screens in the office, I can just see them kind of all the way down this room, have that COVID-19 death toll. And I was like, what is that? What do you guys have on your screen? And they were like, oh, there's this new like virus in China. And like, look at how many people are dying. And I don't know why, but I didn't get impacted by that. I was kind of like, okay, this just seems weird. Like, why is there a death toll? Why would they have a death toll? That seems odd to me. And people were panicking. And then by the end of the second day, so I come to work the next day, I'm leaving and I get an email on my phone just as I'm coming down the elevator, and it says, you guys are not going to come into work for the next couple days. You may be back Friday. And then I never went back to work again. A year and a half later, I ended up like resigning to go back to school. But I was expecting to come back in on Friday or Monday, and I never went back for a year and a half. And my stuff was still at the office, and then I guess they just gave my shoes away, and my stuff on my desk, my books. But anyways, yeah. So the sort of stuff that we're seeing and stuff that I found very concerning was the rhetoric coming from our politicians, media personnel. It was very directed at the unvaccinated as being painting them as these selfish, bad people. Like you'd hear, honestly, should they even get medical attention? Like if they get sick, if they have a heart attack, they chose to not get vaccinated. They don't deserve a bed in our hospitals. Let them die. And you'd hear that. And then the other media personnel going, yeah, that makes sense. I think, why, how is that okay? And then you hear that from the politicians. And that's where I was kind of thinking, I know that this is something else, because that's not what someone does in a leadership position during a crisis. You don't divide groups of people. The virus is not the unvaccinated people's fault. We didn't bring this virus upon our population. What they're doing to me is intentionally trying to divide people. So then I was going, why are they trying to do that? I never had this sense of panic or fear from the virus. And then, I just started questioning things. And then I started noticing other people falling for that and getting angry and saying, you can't question things. Why are you questioning things? You're not an expert. And I was like, well, I didn't realize scientists were the only people who were allowed to ask a question. And scientists can be wrong. Doctors can make mistakes. It's human to error. So I don't really get how you guys got in. I can't identify with the people who have kind of gone down that different path. I'd really like to understand that and why people in this movement didn't fall for that. It'd be an interesting conversation in and of itself, but I guess that's for another day.
Well, it's just interesting because you make such a good point there, Lee, and I just want to add to that. You spoke briefly, just touched on the rhetoric. I mean, again, Lee had said, like, yeah, do they deserve this? Speaking of unvaccinated, of course, what does unvaccinated mean, right? It's an incredibly vague term. This is really hesitant. You must be conscientious of vague terminology, but, as the media was trying to perpetrate. But so unvaccinated against COVID-19. Yes, should we be given medical treatment at all? If we come in for a car crash, whatever, are they worthy of medical treatment, right? So questioning our worthiness of life. Do they take up space? Our prime minister said that. Do we take up space? Like, are we, of course, we're in the second largest landmass in the world country-wise, with the population the size of the state of California. So do we take up space? I mean, it's a ridiculous question, but scary, right? And then our national magazine, the National Post, ran a poll. How many people believe that the unvaccinated should be in prison? I think of my own mother's dealing with breast cancer at the time, severe stage of breast cancer, who decided not to get vaccinated. Right? Questioning if she is going to be sent to prison or taxed, right? Tax. We may lose our home if we don't. Heavy taxes. I mean, really seriously, monthly taxes.
For not getting vaccinated.
Yeah. And then Lee asked such a good point. Like, I'm still curious. Who on earth could ever look at their neighbor who may have had their own decision not to get a medical treatment and think they should be in prison, or they may take up space? Are they worth living? Of course, our threshold in Canada for hate speech is stating if a person is lower, or a group of people are lower than worthiness, they're not how should I put this, they're not worthy of life, or questioning if they're worthy of life themselves. So it's a very high threshold to meet for hate speech, and we really did meet that. We were questioning if a group of people were worthy of life itself. So anyways,
these
it's that
conversations too were being had in like small circles of people. So before I announced that I was unvaccinated to my friends, because you're trying to go under the radar, you're like, things are gonna go away soon. I'll never have to tell them. And the conversations that were being had, like, I don't want to share a drink with an unvaccinated person. Like, I don't want to sip out of their cup. I hope they all die. They're selfish. They're all rednecks. They're insane. I'm sitting there with my group of like longtime friends, and they're saying these things, talking about how disgusting they are and like that they should just die and like how funny that is. And I was thinking, like, these are not people that share my values. I don't like, you don't have to agree with people, but you don't have to like wish death upon them. They're like, honestly, they're killing people. They are actually murdering people. The unvaccinated are murdering. They're murderers. So yeah, honestly, if they die, good. Like, that's actually a good thing if they die. And I thought, can't believe you think that. That's really a really scary. You kind of felt like going out every day, you're looking over your shoulder, like, you know, who aligns with me. The Freedom Convoy, that's why I think it was so powerful. You go there and you don't question anymore. You're like, these people agree with me. I feel safe with these people. These people don't hate me. Like, I get shivers even right now thinking about the moment of stepping onto like the Parliament grounds, and there were thousands of people and everyone was just smiling and like giving us, you just open your arms and someone would come and like give you a hug. You put your hand up and people just start high-fiving you. It was amazing. So I understand why it's so powerful.
And it brought out so many people, just quickly touching on the convoy, who you didn't know where they stood. I mean, we had real Canadian heroes, people I grew up with as a kid. Hockey, for example, is a very popular sport in Canada. People love to play hockey. We had some of the greatest hockey players I grew up with coming out and saying, you know, what's happened is really awful. So it gave the voice to all these people that there was some movement, and it kind of showed that our society, not just from prominent people, but from everyone, more a good cohort of people, I could roughly put it around 30% of the population, was adamantly disagreed with these policies, and so it was a lovely time to see that coming together. You know, humans being friendly with one another is always pleasant. But, yeah.
I also found it very concerning how people are like, they were just going along with it. They were rolling with it. The media said something, and then everyone else was basically reiterating the same talking points. I found it very concerning.
Yeah, especially when it started to contradict like things they had said before. This is where I was like, what? So for example, I had one conversation with a friend, like one person who would discuss this with me and disagreed with me. At one point in time, the media was saying, if you get vaccinated, that will stop the virus from spreading to someone else. And then with Omicron, everyone just realized now, okay, that's not true. The people that were vaccinated got it, and they were like, oh, I shouldn't have been able to get it. But then they were still saying it's selfish if you don't get it. And I was like, well, that was based on the idea that if you got it, it stopped transmission. And I was explaining this to my friend. I was like, you're selfish for not getting vaccinated. I said, well, why am I selfish? He's like, because you're killing grandma. I was like, but how am I killing grandma more than you're killing grandma? And he's like, because you're unvaccinated. I was like, well, break it down. Why is that selfish? I was like, because transmission is the same. So if you go visit your grandma, you could give her COVID. And if I visit my grandma, I could give her COVID. And he was like, well, I don't want to talk about this anymore, but you're just selfish. And I was like, that doesn't make sense. And they're still sort of wrapped up in it. And they weren't able to, despite all these contradictions coming out that just went back and forth. Nothing made sense. But they weren't able to, I don't get it. I don't know how you don't go, wait a minute. Like,
I had the same experience with someone that I had on the phone maybe 3 months ago.
Oh, really?
She got, no, it must have been longer, maybe half a year or a year. I'm not sure anymore. It's like
time is weird during
time is weird, definitely. Yeah. And we were talking, and I wanted to talk to her about the Impfpflicht. It's the vaccine mandates.
Vaccine mandates,
right? They tried to reinstate. They tried to instate vaccine mandates in Germany too, like they had in Austria. And I was talking to her about it. She wasn't like political. She was. I always thought she was a decent person. I think she still is. But the thing that happened was she told me she got the vaccine. And now nothing that happens is concerning her anymore because she's vaccinated, right?
Yeah. Yeah, it's fascinating. I've had a very similar one. Just sounded just like what you've been through there, Mike, with a longtime friend of mine. I still believe he's a wonderful person, but just has had this sort of, we're still vague, I think, in regards to what me and Lee were speaking this morning as to what kind of mental state this is. Is this mass psychosis? And I'm hesitant to use terms, and I like to think that people have the ability to reject such intense kind of indoctrination. But regardless, I believe that is what we're in. And I think we had spoken with a wonderful guy named Mark Groves, and was a guest we had on a while ago, but he was a former pharmaceutical rep. And he said it's really interesting watching the TV because as pharmaceutical reps, he had mentioned that you were given a script of sorts. So when you're proposing a drug to a doctor, the doctor may have concerns or a patient, and you're given a list of things to say to reduce their hesitancy with this new drug that's coming out. And he said it was really interesting because essentially what our media was doing, as I mentioned earlier, was teaching people, every individual watching, how to be their own pharmaceutical rep, right? How to deal with a person who may have hesitancy. And so there was a list. Of course, it's the science, the evidence at the end of the day. I always like to believe that science and evidence is pretty damning and usually wins. And so it would quickly disprove their little, their sheet of what the recorded answers should be. But nonetheless, I think that was the media comes right back into that again. It was teaching people how to interact on behalf of really a pharmaceutical institution. So, yeah.
Yeah, so our time is slowly coming to an end, but before we finish, I think like that wokeism is still going strong, and we're having this conversation in March 2023. So my direct question is like, what are your plans for the future? How even if I may say it, how do you want to remain relevant? And yeah, what are your plans for the future ahead?
So actually, I was just speaking to this yesterday. I was at like a rally, and some people were asking me that question, which is great because the mandates definitely are not what they used to be. A lot of people even think that they're completely gone. Our original mission statement is that we are going to eliminate them. So I still feel that's something we want to settle first. But and I think we'll get there soon. Like I don't think they're going to be around much longer. But the fact of the matter is, I started this not because that was my only concern for the country. I see this as like a larger issue, and this is one element of it, right? Which is the university mandate issue. And I felt at the time like I can't tackle all this. I'm not a politician or a lawyer or a doctor or, an orator or anything like that. What difference can I make? So I took one piece of it and I was like, this is the battle I'll do. Now that we've grown, we have this incredible platform, a great team. The whole team knows what all these other issues are, and we are cognizant of the fact that those issues cause this. So I think we're going to be battling that in the future. I think we're going to expand to talk about the conversations that we do have outside of the public platform. We talked about it before you guys joined the call. Him and I were just chatting for like 45 minutes and going through all these different things. So we definitely have sort of the knowledge, the background, or at least the interest and the curiosity to delve into that. And we'll be expanding for sure in terms of our concern and reach. I think tackling the whole woke issue, as I said in the beginning, my concern for, they're obsessed. They're obsessed with me. But tackling the woke ideology issues is going to be the next thing, and how our institutions really have been taken over, because they're the ones that are molding and shaping our future lawyers, doctors, media, journalists, and whatnot. And the reason why we had so many doctors who didn't stand by their oath, do no harm, supporting bodily autonomy, not coercing their patients, we didn't have that. I expected to have that. We didn't have it. There are few that did that. Journalists who have journalistic integrity and are writing articles to help the people, right? And trying to find the truth in the story. I had an article written about me, and it was pre-written. Like they had already decided what the story was. Then they got the sort of pieces that they needed to try to put it together. And it didn't really make any sense. It was sort of insinuating things like, here's one fact, here's another fact, and here's another fact. Now you, the reader, decide what you think of that. And without full context, it was insinuating certain things. It was like, this is not real journalism. You're manipulating the audience. So our universities are creating these indoctrinated individuals who are unable to think critically. And that's how we're in this mess. So how do we really solve this? We've got to take back our institutions. We've got to get rid of the woke ideology. We've got to bring back critical thinking and freedom of speech. And people should be able to be, you have the right to offend people. That should be okay. And if anything, encouraged. Like, who cares about offending people if you're just speaking to have conversation and debate? So that's what I would say. This isn't over. Students Against Mandates will evolve for sure.
Yeah, not over at all. Yeah, it's a the little analogy would be like it's like going through a storm, right? And I think people down in particularly the south of United States could speak to this well. Hurricane tornadoes come through yearly, right? One part of it is just surviving the storm, and the other part is the cleanup, right? You have to make sure people who were dislocated from their original homes have a place to live. Like, it's only one part. We've been through the initial storm, and certain people have, we've survived it. One could make that argument, but we've been through that regardless. And now we're in that stage of, it's disarray, and we need to go help people. Of course, we still talk to, we were just on a phone call recently with a wonderful doctor in Ontario, Byron Bridle, and one of the doctors who really stood up, and there's been many in Canada, prominent doctors who have been fired, right? They can't access their offices anymore. Like, there is a lot of hardship still being endured by people who were treated terribly as a result of speaking out, and we ought to see that some justice be done, and stand up for people who've been treated so poorly, and not just overlook it since we passed that first difficult half. We're in the second half. We're in the cleanup, and it's a tough stage, just as tough as the first, if not harder. But that's what we're doing right now is ensuring people who've been injured and by the vaccine, who've been fired for speaking out, and all these different other people been so unfairly treated, are still being thought of and still being cared for, and so that's where we're at. It's a long journey. It's not a short one. It takes time, and sometimes it feels as if our cries are going on deaf ears, but they're really not. And I think if we look in history, some of the really difficult situations have been solved by just a small percentage of the population sticking and staying adamant with the issue at hand and not letting it be forgotten, and eventually seeing justice brought. So that's where we're at.
Mike?
I mean, that's great. That's what I hope what's going to happen. We see the videos that you are publishing from Canada, also the trucker protests. And I think that's a great thing to do, and I think you should keep at it.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
So for closing, I just want to thank you so much for your time, the good vibrations that we're all enjoying during our conversation. And I'm very sure that we will meet very soon.
Oh, absolutely. We'll stay in touch. And if anyone wants to learn more about us, they can head to our website at studentsagainstmandates.ca, and there's links to our channels, our Rumble, YouTube, Spotify, and then our social platforms. So Twitter and Instagram would be the largest. So we definitely encourage people to go check that out. Thanks, guys, for having us on.
Thanks for having us.
Bye.